Welcome to Sorting Through Life with Colleen Waterston on AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota. I am Colleen Waterston, and this episode is brought to you by Space Organizing, my home organizing business. And today we are talking about our offering, Legacy Lifting. And this offering is not about rushing older adults to get rid of their belongings. It's about giving people the opportunity to decide what matters, what doesn't, what they want to pass on, and what they don't want their loved ones to have to figure out later. Because one day we won't be here to speak for our stuff. So, what do we want it to say? And today I have Tiffany with me, who manages all the communication on behalf of Space Organizing. And we talk a lot about this legacy lifting offering that we have and the different client work that we do around this. So we wanted to talk about this because I think there's a lot of what our experience has exposed us to with being in client homes and helping people go through their own stuff, go through their parents' stuff, maybe go through their parent stuff with their parent, go through their parent stuff after a parent has passed. We've had a lot of different clients over the years now that have exposed me really to different scenarios and a lot of different relationships to the stuff and to each other amidst this situation. And there's a lot of people who are facing their own stuff and looking around, sitting in houses just filled with their belongings, wondering, where would I even start? There's a lot of adult children who go into their parents' homes and wonder, where would I even start? There's just a lot there. We've talked about it many times on this show, that we live in a society that likes to consume, and we've been marketed to consume a lot. And I think that our stuff is very much connected to our identity and to our purpose and to, what we feel, who we are, and what is important to us. And so we want to talk about this, whether anybody hires Space Organizing or not. I mean, we'd love to help you through it, but I think that I want to be part of normalizing the conversation around the fact that one day you aren't going to be here to speak on behalf of your stuff. So what can you do in advance of that? And what conversations can you have with the people that you love who will be sorting through your stuff to make it easier for them and to actually make it delightful if you give yourself the opportunity? So, Tiffany, thank you for always being by my side, but especially here today. Welcome back.
Thank you. I had read a stat that said 61% of parents 65 and up had discussed with their children what should happen to their belongings after they pass. And so this is definitely a great thing to be thinking about,
So,
discussing.
and that's 61%. So it's like more than half. But think of all those people who aren't having these conversations. And even the ones that are having the conversations, that statistic doesn't tell us how well that conversation went. So there's different ways to have conversations. The conversation might have ended up in not talking for a little bit after. We get really connected to our belongings. So hopefully we can kind of give people some strategies for navigating those conversations as effectively as they can.
Yeah. So the scenario is this. You walk into your parents' house, you see 40 years of stuff. You love your parents, you know these things mean something to them, but somewhere in the back of your mind you're thinking, what happens to all this stuff when they can't live here anymore? And then if you're the parent, you might be thinking, don't touch my stuff. I'm not going anywhere.
I I think this is like the scenario.
That's very relatable.
And especially there's this sandwich generation of people who are raising kids and finding themselves with the demands of taking care of their aging parents. And so they're sandwiched between these two demanding, other generations that it falls to them to figure out what to do. And so they kind of feel stuck. That's that sandwich. Like, you're in the middle, and that's just the way that it is. And you can't, neglect your children, or you shouldn't. And you also don't want to neglect your parents, and then also you have your own life. And I think a lot of people feel overwhelmed by their own life. Our in-home interventions and a lot of the clients that we serve in our regular organizing are usually like middle age, mid-career, they're in the middle of a lot, and they just need kinda help bringing some order to what's going on in their home and structure and some better systems to make things flow. But that's enough on their own, and now you go to your parents' house, and I've heard this from friends, from clients, like, we finished a kitchen the other day, and after 3 days of being in this kitchen, I met the husband on the way out of our last day, and I was sitting there showing him every drawer that we organized and what we did and kind of talking through it, and afterward, he's like, "I really need you for my mom." Like, she's got a ton of stuff. We don't know where to start. So it's like, thank you for what you did in my kitchen. But I'm already thinking, whose kitchen overwhelms me more than my own? My mom's. So people go to their parents' place and they see all this stuff. And I hear about it all the time. And I hear about the stress of it. It's like the future anxiety is stress. And so it's like, what's gonna, you know, or anxiety is like future stress. I don't know how it works out, but it's like, it's yours to take care of, and one day all of that will be yours to sort through. And so, I think there's different ways of approaching it, but I think that a lot of people, when they go with that scenario that you described, it's so human to walk into your mom's house, be like excited. Maybe you're just gonna have dinner, you're catching up, but you can't help but see the environment and see the boxes of things or the rooms that are full of stuff. And I was just showing you this account on Instagram called Millennial Inheritance. And this guy gets all these submissions from people about, look at what I inherited or am inheriting. And it's like the collection of Hummels and, like the Danbury plate collections that come with the certificate of authenticity. And I remember growing up with those 1-800 numbers at the bottom of the screen, collect 5 out of 6. Like and yes, earlier this week we were in a kitchen and they had like these winter Arby's put out these winter wine glasses, like these beautiful there was a time when, like, a Happy Meal came with a real cool toy, not just some chintzy thing you threw away as soon as you got it, but it was like my client remembered driving around to all the different Arby's to get the different types of cups when they came out,
Oh,
because like,
yeah.
every week launched the different version, it's like, this one, they have 6 of the long stem one and 5 of that, and it's like, you can even sell them on eBay and make a few bucks because like nostalgia can get people some money, but you also can't make money on a lot of stuff because you're not the only family who drove around Arby's and whose parents revered those glasses. It's like you see these collectibles and and there may be value, there may not, but that's what we grew up in was this I I'm 39. So I grew up, like 80s, 90s, 2000s where that was kind of what people did. It was like what the corporate marketing structure of the day was at the time. Like you wanted to collect something. You wanted to have the whole collection of it. You wanted to have that, the Beanie Baby had the tag with the year. Like there's that authenticity piece. And so this millennial inheritance, account is like, not only do you inherit this beautiful collection of like porcelain dolls with big eyes, he's talking about precious moments, but he's like, but you also get the paperwork to prove, their birth certificates and stuff. And it's like, you don't realize that it's kind of silly when you're in it because that was just how
That was
we
the 90s.
that was it, and I remember my sister and I would like sit and write down 1-800 number during the commercials. We'd like have a pad of paper where we'd write down as many 1-800 numbers as we could. It's like now it's a QR code. What'll it be in 20 years? Who knows? But so what's happening today, and they're talking, they say like the silver tsunami, there's conversations around like wealth transfer from boomers to generations beneath, coming after them. But it's not just wealth that's being transferred, and a lot of and isn't it lovely for families who have wealth to transfer? But a lot of families, the quote unquote wealth is, oh, that has value, and I'll give you that, or, I can't get rid of it. You'll want it someday. There's a lot of that where a parent will be like, they say they don't want it, but they don't know that they don't want it. Like I maybe 10 years from now they will want it. And the kids have told them 10 times. Like, I really don't. I still really don't. I Mom, like, when you asked me 3 years ago and last year and stuff, and I said I didn't, like, I'm still there. It's like we hope that, like, time will buy desire for this stuff, and it's like, uh-uh. Like, it really doesn't, so it's like, I think uh, what I hope to do, what I get to do with a lot of the clients and what we're doing more and more of with this legacy lifting, I have this little tagline that I started, "Leave a legacy, not a burden," because I was working with this family. There were 4 siblings, 3 siblings and 1 sister-in-law, but um whose husband had passed, their brother had passed. It's Warren's family who's been on the show. We have videos of all of them talking about this process, and there's a lot of overwhelm that goes in when someone passes to look at all of this stuff and size it up and figure it out, and it was just people would come to these estate sales that we had with all this stuff, and they're like, "Wow, there's so much stuff," and I had a lot of conversations with people around that, and, like, half the people that would come to those sales and stop and chat would be like, "I'm working through my stuff so that I don't leave this all to my kids, like, I don't wanna leave this burden," and then there were, just as many that would be like, "You know what? They can deal with it when I'm gone. I'll be dead. It won't matter, so their problem, whatever they want to do then."
Yeah, so almost half of people haven't really even had that discussion with their kids, half of seniors, it sounds like, according to that stat. So why do you think we're so afraid to talk about our stuff?
I think we're afraid to talk about our stuff because we're actually talking about our death. Because our stuff and what surrounds us is what what is proof of life. It's what we've collected throughout our life. Like, I call my home my corner of the world, like my little corner of the world. And And I am lucky enough to have a home and to have my own little corner of the world, and I take pride in my corner of the world, and I plant things, and I buy things that make me feel happy, and I I decorate my home, I have things from my travels, I have things that really make me smile. I like kind of like elegant, quirky decor, like, I like my home to feel really, like, cozy and beautiful and make people smile. I like things that have a story to it. Like, if you want to spend a whole week going through my house, I probably, as a talker, but as an owner of a lot of things that remind me of fun things, could spend a week walking you through my home, telling you things about my stuff. And everybody is that way. We all, to some varying degree, even the minimalists have a certain relationship with stuff for some reason. Sometimes the absence of stuff is its own story, but the collection of stuff and even looking at different generations and the way that we, procure and attain, like, to me, our stuff it's like the fact that we can possess it, the fact that we have ownership of it, like, it's almost to me like that is who we are, and going back to the '90s, the 2000s, even today, the way that we're marketed is like buying this thing makes you that way.
It's
Hold
your identity.
wearing this logo, wearing this brand shows you that I've achieved a certain level of something. Like, I I dress this certain way, I drink from these certain cups, I have this certain thing around me, and it's varying degrees, and it's all sorts of interests, and some people love being a maximalist, and that's part of their identity, that they do have a lot and that they've curated it and it has meaning. But it's also like, but your stuff, so when you ask someone to think about downsizing, and so that's really the legacy lifting of, like, if you aren't able to age in place, or if you want to downsize and you want to just have a smaller space for decades and decades to come, but you just need, that, like, going through your things is the barrier to selling the house or to leaving the apartment or home, or, leaving where you're renting, whatever it is.
Well, it seems like a lot of people wait until there is a crisis versus being proactive about it.
I think a lot of people wait till there is a crisis because I don't think we want to face the fact I don't think that we face aging well in our society. I mean, I've had Botox, I can't talk about it, but it's like we're so anti-aging, and it's like all we wanna do is not die in a lot of ways. It feels like all we wanna do is not age. I don't think that we embrace aging and elders in a way that honors and allows for the elders to be revered in a way that allows them to delight in the process of releasing their stuff to other people. And so to me, and we can get into this, but to me, instead of if we can resituate the conversation, if we can say, leave a legacy, not a burden, and talk about the legacy of what we're leaving behind instead of the fact that we're leaving behind things because we won't be here because we will die. So I grew up in the funeral business. Like from my grandpa started a funeral home in 55. My dad only knew that. I grew up raised by a funeral director. I played at the chapel, like that. There was a ramp at the funeral home. I remember running down so many times, after a funeral, of course, not what was happening. So very disruptive. But, I've just been around death. And I think that that has really motivated me to live a good life and to focus on the days I have and to fill it because I've seen my first time working at the funeral home was in 8th grade, and I had to order a casket for a 2-year-old, and it was an accidental death from a parking lot of there weren't fancy cars with reverse cameras that showed the neighbor. It was a neighbor who accidentally ran into him. It was just devastating. I was in 8th grade when I, saw that, and I've seen many other examples since, but it's like I think there's just been a very innate sense of like, we don't get out of this life alive. And whatever spiritual belief happens after, I'm not here to tell you to have a certain way, but like no one has taken a U-Haul to heaven. Nobody has brought their stuff with them. There are shrines and tombs built for some of the wealthiest people of the like Egyptian pyramids and stuff like that. Like
Their stuff is still there.
but their stuff didn't go with them, like, their soul left their bodies, and maybe their bodies have some beautiful jewels on them, but they didn't get to take it with them. So, to me, it's like, we have to acknowledge that, and to me, that whole, like, "You want me to get rid of my stuff. I'm not dying tomorrow. I'm not dead yet." Like, that to me is not the conversation that we're having or that I want to encourage people to have. Like, I want it to be like, does this serve you? Like, is this still serving you? And how could we, like, to me, our stuff, like, what is the stuff that is like the essentials? Like, what is the essence of who you are? And how can we get down to have the essentials around you? How can we make sure that we get the best things that make you feel the most you and help you be you the best, dress the best, like what outfits make you feel so good every time you wear them? Let's hang on to those. What things in your kitchen do you use every single day? And that's just the most practical stuff. And then a few things, the Arby's glasses that when you look on the shelf, it makes you smile because you remember driving around and getting everyone and probably not, we didn't have MapQuest. It was just like, where am I? Oh, I got to get out, 20 minutes away. How do I get to that Arby's? Like driving the highway to see it on the side of the road, like different time. How can we honor that and honor the moment that we're in and honor the relationships in your life to be able to maybe gift people things that they've been wanting or relieve them of the burden of what they don't. So we'll keep talking. I could talk on this for days and days and days, but we definitely have enough for this episode. So we'll be right back, sorting through life with Colleen Waterston and Tiffany here today. Welcome back to Sorting Through Life with Colleen Waterston on AM 950, brought to you by Space Organizing. So Space by Space Organizing is my home organizing business here in the Twin Cities. And we have this aspect of our business that we call legacy lifting. And it's really meant for people who want to organize with an end in mind. Maybe you've retired from a career and you want to have a retire or you're planning to retire and you don't want to spend the first 5 years of retirement clearing out your house. So do it in advance of retirement so that the day you don't have to go to the office, you can go on vacation. Or maybe you've decided that you just want to downsize and have a more reasonable house for you without kids in it, empty nesting. And so, how do I sort through all this stuff? How do I sort through my kids' stuff? And maybe you're looking at a senior living community, or maybe, unfortunately, you've been faced with a health circumstance that really makes you know that things are going to be harder in the future and you need to get a handle on what you have in front of you so that life can be simpler. And maybe you have somebody in your life who you love who's passed, and now you're looking at all of their stuff and you're trying to make sense of it. So that's kind of everybody, and more. There's more that could fall into that of who legacy lifting can serve. But it's really helping people make sense of stuff with the idea that they don't want to leave the burden of making sense of it to the people that they love, that the people that they leave behind and their stuff is still there. So I say leave a legacy, not a burden. And so we have legacy lifting. So we do the heavy lifting, we'll help you through it. We can design a process that really feels good and right for you and your family and your loved ones to honor your stuff while helping you go through it.
Yeah,
And
so we talked about the thoughts around why we're so afraid to talk about our stuff.
yep.
And so now we wanted to talk about how to start that conversation
Mhm.
and avoiding landmines.
Mhm. So, you sent me a little bit of an idea about this episode, Tiffany, since you're so good at helping frame what we do. But I was kind of thinking, like, think about your last Thanksgiving dinner. And who were you at Thanksgiving with? Or, the last holiday. But it's usually your people, your family. And there's a lot of articles around that time in news about like how to get along at Thanksgiving, like how to get through the entire dinner without, choking on the dinner roll when uncle so and so says what, like, or maybe your brother says this, or so I think there's a lot of family dynamics at play. And if you think back to your last Thanksgiving dinner and it all went swimmingly and everyone got along, and it's like, don't we wish every day could be Thanksgiving and we could have family dinner all the time? You just love being around each other. Amazing. You probably won't have too many issues when it comes to dealing with somebody who's past stuff, like mom or dad's stuff among siblings or whatnot. But if there is a little bit of sibling rivalry or, like maybe tension around things, like to me, our people who are at that Thanksgiving table, a lot of times the tension is like decades deep. It's like sitting at the kitchen table as kids deep. It goes back that far where things happen, dynamics were established, and that's just kind of what we come to expect of each other. Mom does this for you, mom doesn't do that for me. Oh, dad always favors you. There's just things that come up, or maybe some people in the family are more successful than others, and so there's like a fairness, who deserves this, or maybe people are work together and others don't. Every family has their stuff. And like the intangible stuff and the tangible stuff. And so I think just honoring those dynamics and knowing and acknowledging like, oh yeah, this might be tricky, but how can we start to talk about it in a way that can actually move us forward as a family and, move us forward through the stuff. And so I think, the first thing I notice a lot of clients feel kind of cornered, like they're they're facing aging, and I can talk about this. Mary, my dearest best friend Mary, who's 88 and has successfully moved into a senior community, and it was a really, really good experience. We have a whole episode on it, and her kids, like, and grandkids, everybody rallied and put in some effort. It was a really kind of beautiful, supportive process. Um, but Mary's 88 and one of my closest friends, and aging is hard, and I hear about it, and I hear about like she tripped the other day, and that was that's a really big health circumstance that's coming up now, and thankfully she was at that senior community and someone was right there to call the ambulance for her and to, get her in. Her kids, now she's closer to her kids, so they were able to be there for her so much more than when she was further from her kids and it took that much longer to get to mom. So it's like anticipating that our bodies are going to not be as strong as they always are, and just knowing like there's a frailty to life that comes the longer I live. And if I've maintained my health and been physically fit throughout, like it's going to be easier and hopefully longer. But eventually, we all do face a demise. And so, kind of avoiding that is not helpful. And so if you're listening to this and you're in the later years and you are the one who's looking around your home and you know that when your kids come over, maybe they're the one saying something to you like, Mom, you have so much stuff. Like, oh, Mom, I'm going to have to deal with this. Like, Mom, I don't want that stuff. Like, Mom, why can't you just get rid of it? Or Dad, like, or brother, or, anybody who anticipates that this is going to be theirs to go through, their problem, they've got problems in their own life. They have things in their own life, even if they're a minimalist, they've got a life. We all are the centers of our own worlds. And Margarita Magnuson, who wrote Swedish Death Cleaning, and we've done an episode on Swedish Death Cleaning, and she passed, and I'm so sad about that. She passed at 92. I'm sure it was like the easiest passing for her children. I'm sure they just got to sit around and tell stories about how much they loved her because she had taken care of so much so that when that day came, that was what they got to sit around and do versus a passing where you do the things you have to do right away, maybe a funeral, maybe not. My dad's been on, a retired funeral director, and we've talked about how many people don't have a funeral right after these days, and cremation being such a big option. People might get the body cremated and say, we'll wait until everybody's home. And then that doesn't happen often. You kind of get through the initial mourning and grieving and then think, well, why bring that back up 6 months later? It's just there's so many different ways than in the past when someone died and how that was handled. And we also just have so much more stuff, and Amazon, whatever you want to, the influencer world that we live in, we're very consumer driven. And so we just have a lot, and it's very convenient to get a lot. We talk about a lot of our clients just, it's easier to buy something new than to go find what they have, so we just have a lot. And with that, there comes a lot of like judgment of what people have, so sometimes, we have friends that come over and we know the ones that are judging our places and we know the ones that we can, like the dirty bathroom friends who it's like, I know it's dirty in there, but like I know you don't care, and hopefully people's bathrooms are generally clean, but you never know, but you have those friends that love you no matter what. And you have those friends, quote unquote, who go and tell another friend how dirty your house was when they visited, what I mean? But we have people who say things to us that don't help, and that make us feel kind of, to me, like when someone comes in and is like, oh, you have too much stuff. To me, that is just imposing shame on them. Like, you should feel ashamed for how much stuff you have. Like, you should feel, like, you should feel something negative about yourself for this. And this is a problem. And I personally feel that shame is like one of the worst things you can have in your brain and in your life, but it's certainly not something I ever want to impose on people, because it shuts the essence of that person down. It shuts the good down when we feel bad. And so being able to acknowledge, instead of saying, gosh, you have so much stuff, and leading with that, say, you know what, Mom, I've been thinking about it. Like, if something were to happen and if you were to fall and you weren't able to come back into your house. I've done this with a client who doesn't love, like, had all of these papers stacked in a pantry, and it worked really well for decades and decades and decades. But in the event that she won't be able to go to her pantry to grab those things, if something were to happen that makes her not be able to stay home or have to abruptly leave home and not go back home, which happens more than we talk about, um, how would your family members make sense of what you're leaving behind? How easy is it for you to tell them what you want them to bring you? So when we went through this pantry, we got some bins that are like sweater size bins so they don't get too heavy, but we can start to contain things, put labels on things so that it can say what everything is, so that heaven forbid you're in a hospital bed or nursing home bed or somewhere that you're not able to go back home, but you want to go through your things, you can say, there's a bin on the shelf in my pantry. It says, memorabilia and cards. Could you bring that to me? I'd love to go through it. And it's not like, oh, I'd love to go through all my memorabilia and cards, but they're stuck in the back corner of the basement in a bin that's too heavy to carry, even when you're really fit, because we overload bins and stuff. So it's just like going through your things. And so saying, like, hey, mom, if something were to happen to you, what's the most important within the house that you want to make sure I bring where you're going, or like, could we start with that? Could we start putting your favorites aside or create a different space in your closet for what you care about most? Or can we, go through some of this and maybe like get rid of half of this so that I make sure that I bring the half that you want, or or also the stories, Tiffany. The stories attached to stuff is like if you lead with that and you honor that someone's stuff is connected to their identity, give them the opportunity to share a little bit of who they are. Mom, where'd you get that? Like, oh, I got that at like home furniture. It was on sale. It doesn't really mean much to me. I just liked it. Like, you can take it or leave it. I think it's cute. Or, maybe there's something that looks not so new or, like, mom, where'd you get that? And it's like, that was actually in your uncle's office, and he used that little bookshelf, and put all of his work on it, and when he died, I took it because I like thinking that, I have a little bit of like his essence with me, like I have something that he used on a regular basis and now I'm using it on a regular basis and it makes me feel good. I mean, that's the stuff I have. Like I'm kind of nostalgic. Like all you have to say to me is like, oh, that was Grandma June's favorite thing. And I'll take it. Like, so I'm not one of those people who's like, that story doesn't matter. Like, but I think if people can give each other space to tell the stories and say, I'd love to spend a couple hours hearing about some of the things that mean the most to you here, like, and then what a fun, like, way to set that up. And hopefully, like, if you're asking somebody to tell you something positive, they're automatically in a better mood because you're leading with something positive, you
Yeah,
know,
these conversations can kind of be a way for you to get to know your loved one a little more as well.
completely. And so then once you've gone through and you've said, hey, tell me about your favorite stuff in this room. Then maybe after a few items, pick out something that you think means nothing and say, so what about that? I don't care about that. Could I donate it then so that we could get rid of a few things? Like, would you mind? What if I bring a trash bag? Can I bring a trash bag in and get rid of a few things that you don't want? But I loved hearing that story, and hopefully you're genuine and you actually loved hearing that story. But also, I think it's important who you surround yourself with when you are going through your stuff because just like those, decades deep things that trigger us and dynamics, decades deep dynamics. We should write a book about that. But it's like those things that push our buttons for as long as we can remember. Like I was in a client and it was an older gentleman. I just adore this guy. He's just such a sweetheart. And his siblings came to the consult because he is single and they're the ones who are like, we got to deal with this and you got too much. And he's just so much fun and such a sweetheart. And I also can see from the siblings' perspective, like he's got a ton of stuff. I don't get intimidated by stuff anymore, like I can see it's a lot. I know a challenge versus, like, but I welcome the challenge. It's what I do professionally. So like I'm like, okay, this is how every job is a puzzle. So for me, I'm kind of like, everything leads to clues and I get to know people through their stuff. And it's the fun of what I do. And so I'm not intimidated by it, but I can understand and I'm not judging it. Like the siblings are kind of they really think this is ridiculous. Like the amount of, books this man had. And I told him, I said, I can tell you you are not a hoarder, but you are obsessed with books.
Mhm.
But the thing is, it wasn't even the books he was obsessed with. He is brilliant. And it's the knowledge that's captured inside those books. It's the topics those books represent. It's the education he had. We had this running joke because he kept saying, I almost went to med school. And I was like, yeah. Okay. Like I almost went on American Idol, like, but I didn't even apply. Like, it's like what you almost do, but sometimes like that's our aspirational selves. Like we're hanging on to our almost selves. We're hanging on to our I almost became a knitter, but never got through a mitten, never got through a sweater, a blanket, or even like a little hot pad for the kitchen. It's like we've got these almosts. And then when we do get closer to the end of our life, we realize there's less days to get to those things, to read those books, to take up those hobbies. And that can be hard for us to grasp with.
Yep.
And so then when our family members come in and kind of push us to do so, it's it's basically saying, "You're not gonna be here that much longer." Your scenario is like, "I'm not going anywhere." And it's like, so true. And maybe you aren't going anywhere for like 10 years. So, within this consultation with this family, I was able to focus on the client, the man that I'd be, serving and working with and bringing the girls and bringing the team to really go through book by book and here's what I think we can do to facilitate this, and facilitate is like facile I think is to make easier. And so it's like here's what I can do to make this easier for you and your family. But so the sibling energy during that consultation, I said to him, I said, so I also come from a family and we also have dynamics. So I know that when your brother says something, you're not just hearing what he just said, you're hearing what he said 5 months ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago. We hold on to these things that become part of our identity that people say. And then it's like, well, don't take away my books. Like, don't take away the fact that I was so smart. I almost went to med school, And it's like, and it might not help that the siblings are actually doctors, So it's like they got there, but he's brilliant in his own way. And it's like saying goodbye to those books just needed a little more compassion than let's get a dumpster and throw textbooks from the 80s in it in your front yard so that you have to watch it happen. Like it's like, let's go through these. I'll take it on and I will get rid of the books. I will try my best to keep them in circulation if they still can, but some are gonna go in the dumpster, but it's like, let's have fun with it. Those are some of the most fun sessions. I was able to call a sister. I say, can I let your sister know?" We take pictures of ourselves and send them to her during the session, and it was like, instead of being this very weighted, you know, "Gosh, there's just too much, there's just too much." It's like, there is a lot, but we're getting through it, you
Well,
know?
I'm hearing come at these conversations from a place of curiosity, not attacking.
Curiosity, compassion,
Passion, yeah.
and those 2 things alone can probably get you through anything, if you and empathy, I would say, maybe empathy and compassion, I don't know, completely the difference, but just knowing that and it's especially if someone is maybe facing a more critical health scenario, which I know that we are gonna talk about that. We'll come back and kinda talk about that, like, having a conversation before you need to, because when that when that end date is more known because maybe there's a diagnosis or and that's really a sensitive time. And so, there's let's do this before it's already going to be sensitive. It's like let's do it well before it's tough. Let's talk about this well before we need it. Like I'm 39 and I talk about this stuff all the time, and I hope to live to be 139 if it's fun then, but if I joke about that. I don't think anyone will get there, um, but it's not about preparing because it's around the corner. It's just about living your life honoring the fact that if we are alive, we one day will die. Like anything that is living, it's the cycle of life. It's like we have growth, we have birth, we grow, we die. Some things stunt us, some things help us, but um, there's certain like toxicities that will shrivel us up. And, we want to be our vibrant selves and surrounded by things, it's okay to want to be surrounded by beautiful things or things that make us smile. Um, but a lot of times we're surrounded by things that no longer serve us. And so kind of allowing us to live with what serves us. Not necessarily less, but probably. But we'll get to it in our end here. Let's take a quick break. This is Sorting Through Life from Space by Space Organizing on AM 950, and we will be right back. Welcome back to Sorting Through Life with Colleen Waterston on AM 950. Brought to you by Space Organizing. And if anything that we have talked to you about today is resonating and you want to reach out, go to spacebyspaceorganizing.com and you can learn about all this and more for what we have to offer. But today we've been talking about legacy lifting.
So in the last segment, we talked about having difficult conversations around what happens to our stuff after we are no longer here. So now we want to talk about what does it mean to leave a legacy and not a burden?
I say this because there's this concept, Swedish death cleaning. And it's this idea that you go through your stuff with the idea that you one day will die. And so you do a death cleaning. You know, how can you kind of unburden yourself of your stuff? But you really, this whole concept with is just, it's a Scandinavian concept, but this Margareta Magnusson helped us to coin the term by her book. I think it's The Gentle Art of Swedish Death Cleaning, but she says in it, if you aren't gonna take the time to go through your own stuff, like, it's a wishful dream to think that someone else will when you're not here to go through your stuff. So it's kind of a self-responsibility of what am I leaving behind for people, whether that be, positive or negative. And so what I think and what I like to think is that we do leave a lot of ourselves behind through our stuff, but more so through the memories that we have with people, the way that we've made them feel, the impact we've had in people's lives, the investment that we've made in them, and just the time and the love that we have for the people that we care about. And some people's legacies are really just felt within their family, within their core people. And some people have legacies that live on for decades and hundreds, centuries and thousands of years. We've got these leaders, good and bad, who have kind of like notorious legacies. And like we still say quotes, when you say, ask not what you can do for your country, but what, not what your country can do. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
what can you do for your country? We know, like JFK, it's like we have these legacies. And I think it's like how long we leave we leave ourselves on this earth, like how deep the hole is that's filled, like how long someone taps into their memory of you and their stuff. And so it's like leave a legacy, not a burden, is like leave yourself behind in a way that people delight instead of there's so much to go through.
Deal with any other stuff, yeah.
I just wish I didn't have to deal with this, and
So
so
legacy lifting can help
the
the
legacy
burden part.
lifting is my way of not having an offering called Swedish death cleaning, to be fully honest, because I don't think that Americans want to talk about death. And that's fine. And I'm not going to impose that everybody talk about death all day. I don't want to either. But I do think that I have a healthy relationship with it, and I don't mind normalizing it and having conversations that I think are refreshing and authentic and help people to say something real out loud to someone else or to a family member and acknowledge that this moment is hard because I'm facing something. I don't want to die, and I'm closer to it because of XYZ, and that's hard, and I have very real conversations with my 88-year-old best friend, Mary, about aging. And she is definitely closer to the end of her life than the start of it. That's just what it is. And it's hard. And she's said goodbye to a lot of people and she's attended a lot of funerals. And honestly, if you're going to pass, she's a great person to have with you. She has helped a lot of people, held a lot of people's hands through their last breaths and their final moments. And that is just truth. But what we leave behind is you know, can be something that's awesome for people. We can leave behind, we can make it easy for the people that we leave behind to just be sad we're not here anymore. And what I realize through what I do professionally, which is helping people make sense of stuff and helping people make sense of life through making sense of stuff and helping people to get out of their own way by getting the obstacles in their home out of their own way. But I realize with this aging population, with all of the trends in our population, with all of the, we have articles about this. I just sent one to you this morning. There's a lot out there about how what is happening to the sandwich generation, what Gen X is feeling about their parents, their stuff falling on them. And so within that, for me, I've created this legacy lifting offering to say, we can serve this need. Like we can create smaller dose sessions. We can come in fast and furious. We can work as fast as we do on an in home transformation. But a legacy lifting client most often wants to work a little slower. They want to work shorter. I have a client I go do for 2 hours at a time. I have a client I go do for 4 hours at a time, whereas my in-home interventions might be 6 hours, 8 hours with 3 of us there. A legacy lift could be a couple hours with 1. And so it's also then more economical because you're spreading it out. A lot of people have fixed income later in life, and so it would be way too much to do at one time, but we can do a little bit every other week. We can do a little bit once a month. We can work toward this, and then also your family knows she's working on it. My parents have a legacy lifter, so they're getting through it. And with that is also knowing who needs to be part of this process, who needs to be informed. And I have a lot of fun leaving behind evidence of credibility, to the children coming in and being like, oh, like there was a gift card that had, value still on it, expired 10 years ago. And I was able to get that value recovered by telling the story to 112 Eatery, the restaurant downtown. Shout out to them for honoring it. And then the son was able to come and be like, wow, that girl could have easily thrown this away because it expired 10 years ago. But now there's a $500 gift card that we can use and go to dinner and honor my dad who got it from clients during his career. So there's little things that we can do that are really, really fun, but it's in smaller doses. It's going through your stuff a little bit at a time. It's just acknowledging that one day someone else will be there to go through it that isn't you. And so how can we go through it today and knowing that is hard to do alone because you're facing why you're doing it and you are saying goodbye to a little bit of yourself. And sometimes it's just so helpful to have someone who's thoughtful and empathetic next to you and who asks to hear that story, give it a little squeeze on the way out the door and say, okay, that felt okay to me. That felt good. So Colleen Waterston from Space by Space Organizing on Sorting Through Life on AM 950 with Tiffany here. If you are interested in being in touch, please do give us a call, 612-747-1331, and we will talk to you again next time.